Hey everyone, and welcome to the last episode of the Linux and open source news show for 2025. Of course, we're gonna keep doing this in 2026, and surprisingly, this week we had a bunch of stuff. First, there's a brand new X11 server, not an attempt to improve the old terrible codebase, but a rewrite of an entire new server based on the X11 protocols, which is far more interesting than just trying to denoodleify the existing codebase. We also have a new packaging solution for portable apps, trying to add a repo system to all of those portable formats. It's not a new packaging format, so it's not exactly fragmentation. We also have the Steam Deck LCD being discontinued, and a bunch of other stuff that we need to talk about. So, as usual, all the links are down in the description, and as usual, here's a message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Proton Mail. They've been a long-standing partner of the channel for, I think, 2 years now, maybe even more than that, and they're also a solution that I personally use for all my personal email. It's zero-access encrypted, it's end-to-end encrypted, it's really secure, it has all the tools to fight phishing, spams, and all of that crap. And of course, when you create your Proton account, you also get access to a calendar, contacts, storage space, a password manager, a VPN. You also now have a Google Docs and Google Sheets alternative baked in. It's just a fantastic suite that I use every day. You can get started for free, of course, but they have paid plans that give you more features, more storage space, more privacy options. You know how all of this works. The link, as usual, is down in the description. Can only recommend Proton Mail. They're just fantastic. Okay, so X11 fans will be thrilled to learn that there's a new X server being written from scratch as a replacement for the aging X.org. This new replacement is called Phoenix. They're writing it in Zig, so it is not a people keep rewriting stuff in Rust kind of project, and the goal is also to have a modern, safer version of an X server that supports variable refresh rate on different displays and different refresh rates on different monitors, HDR support, better handling of graphics and GPUs, no tearing, lower latency than X.org, potential future expansions of the X11 protocol, and also Wayland compatibility baked in, so potentially the best of both worlds. They're not aiming for full X11 protocol support, they want to implement what modern applications use. But when they say modern, they say apps written in the last 20 years or so. So this is still a huge amount of stuff that they're going to implement. Apps will be isolated from each other to avoid the usual X11 lets any app be a full keylogger kind of problem, and permission prompts will be used to grant apps permissions to interact with one another, much like how Wayland works. This will allow, for example, for global keyboard shortcuts. People will also have an option to make Phoenix behave exactly as X.org, so not secure whatsoever, but fully open for any app to do whatever it wants. Of course, it is a first draft of that project. It is not usable at all right now. It can render a few basic applications using Vulkan, GLX, or EGL, but it is not going to power your regular day-to-day computer anytime soon. Now, it is extremely interesting as a project because I think all efforts to try and work from the existing X.org codebase are just doomed to fail. You have the X Libre project, it seems to make some progress on some amount of stuff, but this codebase is just fundamentally incompatible with modern hardware. It was just not designed to handle multiple monitors with different scaling factors, different refresh rates, HDR, multiple GPUs. It's just hacky and patchy, and it's never really going to work. Rewriting it from scratch, though, is a longer project, potentially, maybe it's even faster technically, but it has the potential to really bring a full-featured X server that doesn't have all the holdbacks from the older X.org. So I think it's an interesting project. I still personally think Wayland is where Linux is at right now, where it will keep going. It's what most distros rely upon. It's what most desktop environments are already on or moving towards. I don't think anyone's really going to go back to this solution, but for people who need it, who want it, and as an alternative, I think it's a fantastic project, so I'll just keep an eye on it. So there's yet another packaging solution for Linux, it seems, called Package Forge, and it is not a new packaging format, thank goodness, so you can stop writing your comment about fragmentation. Instead, it is a package manager that aims to handle a bunch of different formats in just one place. It basically slots in alongside Flatpak, snaps, app images, and the like, but it's a new project that wants to make distro-agnostic packages work properly, managed through a single interface, and on any distro, not needing any daemon running in the background or any software being installed by the user before they can access anything. The advantage is thus that you don't need anything special installed to use Package Forge. You don't need the snap daemon, you don't need Flatpak, it can run on any distro regardless of what is installed. All you need to install is the package manager itself, which still means you have to install something, I guess. So Package Forge supports app images, portable packages, archives containing precompiled binaries, basically all the portable formats are in there. And they're going to place them in a specific directory, much like what macOS does. But it goes a bit further by adding repos that host all of these packages, compared to, for example, app images, which already exist but don't really have a centralized repo and package manager and managing all the updates. You have to add a bunch of stuff on top of the app images you installed to make that work. Also, Package Forge will add checksum verification to make sure that what you're downloading works as intended and hasn't been tampered with. It has also transparent build logs as well, so you can check that what has been built is what you want to run. Now, the package manager is called SOAR, S-O-A-R, and it integrates applications in your desktop using the free desktop.org spec, so when you install something, it's just going to place the precompiled binaries in their own specific folder, but it is going to integrate everything with your app menu, your launchers, your whatever else that you use to start applications. It also adds applications in your path, so you can run them using the command line with just the name of the binary. You don't need any specific syntax, like for example what Flatpak requires. Applications are installed in a consistent location. You can just move the folder containing your apps to another system and run the package manager, and things will be set up properly as well. It also supports command line tools and graphical applications to be installed using that package manager. So they're not building their own packaging format at all, they're just taking all the existing packaging formats that are portable, like single archives, app images, run images, or whatever else, and integrating them in a single repo with a single interface to properly run those, make them portable. Basically, it's trying to build the macOS package manager and app bundle thing without reinventing yet another format, which I think is interesting. Now, most of those app images and binaries tend to be made by third-party developers or maintainers. They're not straight from the original app developers, although a lot of app developers do provide just a tarball that just contains the precompiled binaries for a specific system. So maybe that could work. Personally, I prefer getting my software straight from the developers themselves without any third-party middleman. That's why I use mostly Flatpaks, but this could also be pretty interesting, especially for the portability of it. Now, it is over for the Steam Deck. Well, just for the LCD model of the Steam Deck. The venerable handheld, which is the model I own, by the way, and it's still pretty fantastic, it's now being discontinued and will not be produced anymore. They will keep selling it until their stock runs out, and then it will be OLED only. They started by announcing this for the US, but they added the same mention to all other websites since, and from what I could see, it's already completely out of stock, at least from the website accessible from the EU. They were only selling the 256 gigs model, the 64 gigs had already been discontinued, the 512 gigs was already discontinued as well, but this means that the entry price for the Steam Deck is much higher than it was, because you're now basically starting at 569 euros, which is more expensive than the Switch 2, for example, for about comparable performance, but on an older device, admittedly with a much bigger games library though. The 419 euros model was a nice gateway into the SteamOS and Steam ecosystem, so it's a bit disappointing to see it go, but I suppose that with the crazy RAM prices due to AI companies gobbling up whatever they can, it might not have been sustainable to keep producing an entry-level one at a lower cost. So it is understandable, but pretty disappointing. 569 euros is a lot to invest in a gaming handheld that was created, 3 years ago. It's not brand new, and it's pretty expensive for what it does. You can't really get a much more powerful thing for the same price, because the Xbox Series X and PS5s and whatever else are extremely expensive, and most handhelds are also way more expensive than that. But I think it's sad to see the entry price go, because that must have driven the success of the Steam Deck quite a bit, I think. Now, the Linux Foundation published their annual report, which is sure to make certain people write some kind of weird, outraged clickbait about how little the Linux Foundation actually supports Linux. Imagine that. 8.4 million only out of the 285 million spent. Where is all that money going? Well, we know where it's going, because the Linux Foundation is actually pretty transparent about where they invest their money. It's going to all the other projects that the Linux Foundation hosts and supports, at the tune of 181 million. Stuff like PyTorch, OpenSearch, RISC-V, Cloud Native, OpenJS, Automotive Grade Linux, Containerd, Jenkins, Kubernetes, the Overture Maps Foundation, Podman, and hundreds more. All things that help make Linux the powerhouse it is for everything server related. Because you can have the best operating system you want in the form of Linux. If all the tools that you can use to develop stuff on it or run it are terrible, then it doesn't matter. So investing in all of those things is actually probably more important than investing in the Linux kernel itself. Revenue came mostly from memberships and donations to the Linux Foundation. That's $133 million. Events brought in about 60 million. Training and certification generated about 30 million. And project services about 83 million. Now, just because the Linux Foundation is called the Linux Foundation doesn't mean they only support the Linux kernel. It would be a big mistake to only focus on that, because the reason why people mostly use Linux for anything server related or development related is all of the fantastic tools that just work much better on Linux than on any other systems, and most of those are open source. That is what the Linux Foundation is currently, which is probably why the name is not exactly right anymore, because they support an enormous amount of projects through hosting, through sometimes code as well, paying for the infrastructure and a bunch of stuff like that, plus all the events they organize to let people know about this stuff and present their new advancements. So I'm not saying the Linux Foundation is a perfect organization, because every time you start managing hundreds of millions, there's probably something shady in the background, an executive being paid way too much, a board of directors grabbing some money for themselves and for completely unnecessary expenses. This is very likely happening at most of these big foundations with all of that money. But judging the Linux Foundation on just the spending they do on the Linux kernel is extremely short-sighted, and it's sort of a big misunderstanding of what this foundation is supposed to do. It's still a lot of money invested in open source, and I think that's good. Now, I already made a video about this, but Elementary OS 8.1 was released this week. So you can go check out the video if you want to see everything that's new in there. But if you want the TLDR, this distro moved to Wayland by default, much like everybody else is doing. What they call their secure session, which is the Wayland session, is now on par with the X11 one. The X11 session is still there if you need it or prefer it. It now supports fractional scaling properly, something I completely forgot to mention in the video, by the way. Multi-monitor support has been vastly improved, as well as touch and gesture support. They've added background apps to the dock in a little folder. Workspaces can now be created and tweaked from the dock directly. The workspace switcher is now part of the multitasking view, like in GNOME. Password dialogues prevent any other window from stealing focus, so you're always typing the password in the right window. The App Center now shows percentage-based ratings in app pages for applications that have those ratings, and if there are elementary-specific screenshots for those applications, this is what will be shown. They will also now indicate which games support controllers, the licenses are more clearly identified, and generally the App Center performs a lot faster too. Also, they split system updates from app updates in two different places. App updates are in the App Center, system updates are in the system settings. It's fine, I'm not sure that it's fantastic. I kinda like the one-click full system update that we tend to have on Linux, but that also makes sense. You will also see the size of the download of those system updates with nice progress indicators, and things will not download automatically if you're on a metered connection. They also added two new apps, a system monitor and a simple maps app to let you open map links. Accessibility got a big overhaul too. Better screen reader support in the onboarding app, better keyboard navigation, the notifications, the system dialogues, the app center, the calendar, the firmware updater all support screen readers too. You also get the latest Ubuntu 24.04 LTS base with the hardware enablement stack, the kernel 6.14, and Mesa 25. It is a very cool set of improvements. You already have all of those changes if you were already running Elementary OS, but if you haven't tried it in a while, you can now download the ISO with all of this built in. Now, they will ask you to pay something, but you can set a custom price to 0 to try it out and then pay them if you actually really enjoy the distro and you want to contribute to their efforts. I really love Elementary OS. They added a bunch of nice little design touches. It's still extremely polished, extremely nice looking, cohesive. They're still the only file manager that is nice and graphical that has the column view, which something should happen on other file managers to add that because it's extremely useful. But yeah, I love it. Go check out the video if you want to know more. It's a good distro. Good news for older AMD GPU users. The future version of the Linux kernel, version 6.19, will come with a nice Christmas gift after Christmas, of course, because 6.19 won't release for a few weeks. In this kernel version, older AMD GPUs will be moved to the newer AMD GPU driver instead of using the older Radeon driver, which seems to result in a big performance boost for those old GPUs, about 30%. This also lets these cards use Vulkan through the RADV driver that is in Mesa, which allows for gaming with Proton and a lot of other stuff. This is for GPUs like the Radeon HD 7000 or 8000 series or the RX 200 series. Newer cards than this already used the AMD GPU driver apparently. Phoronix performed a bunch of benchmarks and the benefits are huge. Playing older games is now a thing you can do reliably, and anything GPU related is just simply much faster without anything to do on your part, apart from installing a distro with the kernel 6.19 when it is officially out. This is something I really love with Linux. You just get better performance over time, even for decades old cards, which is insane. I don't think any other OS really goes back on those things, and probably the goal was to have less maintainer work to do on an older driver that was just not performing up to par, maybe took a little bit too much time, a little bit too much space, so they're moving all those cards to the newer driver because it is better for everyone. But the end result is that users of older computers now have a second life for those cards, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, CachyOS or CachyOS, I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. This is a distro I haven't looked out yet on the channel, but it's definitely making the rounds, especially but not limited to the gaming circles. It's an Arch-based distro with a lot of out-of-the-box tweaks and optimizations to try and improve specifically performance. And it seems to actually do something in CachyOS, where most distros touting better optimizations and better patches tend to just perform exactly on par with the thing they're based on. Not so with Cachy. It uses optimized packages compiled for x86 64 v3 or v4, plus packages made specifically for AMD Zen 4 or Zen 5. They also use a custom kernel with a lot of patches applied to make desktop use more responsive. They use different schedulers too, to again optimize for desktop use, and they have a set of custom tools and utilities to get deeper in that config. And now they also want to bring the same optimizations to the server. The goal is to have a specialized edition for NAS, workstations, and servers, so they're not just focusing on servers, something that hosting providers can deploy easily with a hardened configuration, the usual pre-tuned settings, but also performance-optimized packages for web servers, for databases, and other important parts of a server stack. Now this is interesting stuff. I do need to give a shot to this distro. You'll tell me in the comments, do you pronounce it Cachy or Catchy? Let me know. I'll adjust accordingly. In the meantime, I need to give it a shot. I'm not sure I would want to use an Arch-based distro on a server unless they specifically move out of the rolling release model of Arch, because my experience with Arch itself and Arch-based distros has been that it requires too much maintenance over time for a very reliable workstation. At least for my use case, I use very capricious programs like DaVinci Resolve, and everything that breaks even in the slightest bit, OpenCL, CUDA, or the NVIDIA drivers, is just messing up my entire workflow, and this happened a lot of times when I used Arch. So I don't know if CachyOS would be a good solution for that if they keep that rolling release model, but if they have a more stabilized package base, that could be interesting. I'll probably make a video about this distro at some point on the channel, because it seems to really pick up some steam, especially in the gaming sphere, no puns intended. Now, to conclude on today's episode, Italy dropped a fine on Apple for their privacy policy practices. The fine is about $116 million, which is, of course, very little to pay for Apple, and it comes as Italy says Apple abused their app tracking transparency feature to further their dominant position in mobile ads on iOS. Basically, this ATT framework is what powers all the little pop-ups that you see on iOS to let you allow or deny data collection from an application you're starting up for the first time. It shows a standardized prompt that is mandatory if you ever want your app to be published on the store and you intend to collect data. But then the app itself needs to request consent once again, so they are allowed to collect that data, because under the GDPR, the app developer needs to have their own method and authorization to collect user consent. And the standardized prompt is a system level one by Apple, not an application level one. It's been designed voluntarily this way by Apple. So users have to click twice on I consent, which is a bad experience for users, and it is also the literal death of data collection for applications, of course. But what's worse is that Apple's apps do not show that prompt, because why would Apple subject themselves to the same restrictions, right? So Italy found that this method of gathering consent is obnoxious and unnecessary. France had already fined Apple 150 million euros for the exact same problem. Poland is investigating the same thing. Apple is already making concessions in Germany for the exact same problem too. Now, if you look at this surface level, it looks like Apple is being fined for implementing privacy controls for users, which obviously would be completely stupid. The problem is not that they're adding that pop-up, is how they added it. They added it voluntarily as not a real way of gathering consent. It gathers consent at the iOS level, not at the app level, so the app developer has to re-implement another consent window, which means, of course, no user will ever accept anything. Even less than if they only had one pop-up to click on. Apple could have designed that system level pop-up to enrich the application itself, not the system level, which would have been much better. They could also have designed system level controls to disallow data collection per app and then send that information to the application itself so they could revoke the consent that users gave. But of course, that's not what they did. And of course, they exempted themselves from that, meaning all of Apple's apps do collect personal data in the background. They also have the ad network that uses all of this data to sell ads, and so they are virtually now a full monopoly on iOS for just displaying ads inside of applications, which is what they're being fined for, and I would argue not fined enough for. So that's the real issue, not that they implemented a privacy system, which obviously in itself would be good if it had been implemented properly. And so I guess this concludes this episode and the year 2025, but we can't stop there without a mention for our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You all know what they do by now. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. I only have praise for what they're doing because I have been using their computers for a long while now, and I don't use any other computer brand currently. I even use their own distro, which is Tuxedo OS. I love what they're doing. They have a big range of computers. You can pick the internals of your laptop or desktop. You can pick the logo engraved on the lid. You can pick the keyboard layout. You can install any distro you want on them, really. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. They're absolutely fantastic, and I can only recommend them. As usual, the link is down in the description. Okay, so now this is truly the end of this episode and the end of the videos for 2025. Thank you all for sticking around with the channel for all of that time. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are. You can show me appreciation this way. Plenty of links down in the description to support the show or to learn more about the topics we discussed today. You know how all of this works. Merry, happy new year and all of that jazz to everyone who celebrates this new year. And I guess you'll see me in the next one in 2026. Bye!